Hey there, it's Hannah and welcome to the channel where I make pixel art game assets for beginners. In today's video, we're gonna learn about shapes. Shapes are the fundamentals of art. Most of the time, you'll see these three shapes: rectangle, circle, and triangle. If you look closer at real-world objects, you'll see that they can be broken down into their fundamental shapes. For example, when you see this coin, you see a circle, or when you see a crate, you see a rectangle, or when you see a spike, you see a triangle. Sometimes shapes can be a bit more skewed, but in a way, they can be tied to their fundamental shape groups. For example, an egg can be associated with a circle because it has those curved features as seen in a circle. Or another example is that a chest can be associated with a rectangle because it has straight or hard edges. A cursor can be associated with a triangle because it has sharp corners. But not all objects are constructed by one shape. Some objects are more so like a combination of these elements. For instance, this potion is made up of three shapes: a circle for the body, a rectangle for the neck, and an inverted triangle for the mouth. And this is generally how we construct objects. We start with the basic shapes and then piece them together to form an overall silhouette of the object. When you're just starting out, this is a helpful way to approach drawing, because you don't have to think about getting the lines perfect yet. It's to help you picture objects in drawable chunks. Now here's an exercise you can do. Take a look at different objects and find shapes in them. You want to draw out these shapes alongside the reference object. This is to kind of train your observation, basically analyzing and recreating the object from the ground up. For example, we have a coin that is shaped like a circle, so what we want to do is to reimagine that circle and draw it next to our object. For more complex objects, we'll have to break it down into its component shapes, which means that we'll have to find our fundamental shapes in these objects. Here we have a key, which if we break it down, we can see that it is composed of circles and rectangles. This time, you want to not only draw out the shapes on the side, but also assemble them. In our example, try to arrange these basic shapes in a way that forms the structure of this key. The whole point of this exercise is for you to know what shapes are in the object first, then we'll get onto the part where we refine the details later in the video. Here are some sample objects you can try to test yourself out. In this exercise, I've categorized them into simple and complex objects. So simple objects are usually objects that compose of one shape, while complex ones needs you to put together more than one of those. You can look at the examples in the files. On the left, we would have a sword, and to the right, we would have a breakdown of the object, which are two rectangles placed in the shape of a cross. I've attached the file down in the description, so feel free to use it and practice along. Now that we've crafted our key, we can enter the next area, 3D. Objects in real life aren't always flat like that, so we have 3D shapes to support these fundamental shapes. Now, instead of a rectangle, you have cubes. Instead of circles, you have spheres, and instead of triangles, you have pyramids. Looking back at our previous objects, you can see that realistically, they can have a certain thickness to it. But we can't really see that because we're looking at the object straight on. These objects have their thickness protruding to the back, which from our angle is entirely covered by their front side. But if we were to rotate it, we can see the back side of our object. There's only a handful of looks you can draw with a flat shape frame, but with a 3D shape frame, you can explore more ways of drawing an object, simply by rotating it to the right, to the left, or up or down. There are more of these shapes that you can look into. Some popular ones might include prisms, cylinders, and cones. Even though these look entirely different from what we've seen before, they're still very much tied to their flat shapes. For example, you can see a square in a cube and you can see a circle in a sphere. And that's what sets these objects apart. So if you see a 3D object that has like two circles, you might assume that this is a sphere, not a cube. So few things to keep in mind. You can find flat shapes in 3D shapes, and by checking out the flat shapes inside these 3D objects, you will be able to tell them apart. Let's reconstruct our flat object as a 3D object, which is this coin. In reality, these objects are cylinders, which are known for having two circular bases and a tube that connects them too. So to draw this coin in 3D, you can start with two circular bases. Draw the first one on top and then copy it over to move it to the bottom. Connect them together to get the coin shape, and then erase some of the lines to get a solid coin object. And if you really want to sell it, you can add some golden color to your object. For example, add a lighter color to the top and a darker color to the bottom. Here you can really see the thickness of the object, as separated by the light and dark colors. You might also find in the link below a section for 3D objects. In there, you can reference some of the objects that use these shapes. So just like in earlier exercise, try drawing the shape alongside the reference object. But this time, make sure they're 3D shapes. You don't have to add in the colors like we did at the end there. Just make sure you have the right shape next to the object. Once you're more comfortable with it, we can learn to add simple details to our object. So we know that objects can be constructed by multiple shapes, and that also applies to when we're adding in details. The only difference is that for detailing, we're adding another layer of shapes on top of our base shape. Usually it can be as simple as adding a distinct feature to our object, but at times it can be as complicated as adding shadings to a part of it. Detailing is important after you got the base shape right. However, they're just additional shapes, which means that you can have it or not have it depending on the style you're going for. For example, if we're going for a simple pixel art style, this coin design would suffice. But if we're looking for something that is more refined, adding a dented spot in the middle would really make it more recognizable. You don't really have to pressure yourself to add in all sorts of details for your object, more so just choose one or two details that stand out the most and draw it. For our coin, all we need to do to add that touch of detail is to create a dented spot shape. You can imagine there's a small cylinder cut into our object. The small cylinder here is an additional shape on top of our base shape. Just like how we would draw our cylinder, first draw a circle in the middle of the coin and copy that circle over to the bottom. Then erase some of the lines that got obscured to make it a solid object. You can color code it with some simple colors, maybe a lighter color for the outer ring and a darker color for the rim inside, and that should do. As you can see, we're not adding a crazy amount of details to our object. We're just simply adding one or two more shapes to our base to give it a distinct feature. In the beginning, it's best to keep these details simple, like having a small circle in the middle or so. The goal is to recognize how objects are constructed through shapes, even down to the tiniest details. We can do it with our previous object too, like this key. We can add another circle to the middle to create a bow, or we can cut out some square shapes up here to create keywords. There are a lot of objects you can take from the practice file. For example, here I want you to try to recreate the sword on your own, and by the end of this video, I'll show you how I go about it. I feel like there's one thing I should mention that is unique to pixel art: object size. The smaller your object size, the more it will lose its shape, especially for shapes like circles. If you compare a 64x64 circle to an 8x8, you can see that the bigger one offers us more of that curvature detail. So that's why when you draw, you want to pick a suitable object size. Some of the more popular object size are 16x16, 32x32, and 64x64. So like depending on how detailed you want your objects to be, whether that's highly detailed or simple and pixelated, you will want to pick an object size that can accommodate what you're looking for. The thing about 3D objects is that they can be rotated, which means that there are a lot of ways we can draw one object. For example, these are different snapshots of our coin. Though it looks different in each of these frames, mainly because the circles are skewed, you can still recognize its core shape, which is this cylinder. That's why earlier when we look into skewed shapes, we gotta know which fundamental shape group it falls into. So in exercises like these, we'll be able to tell where our shapes are. I'd recommend you practice drawing out these shapes in different rotations. Just begin with the basic shapes, like cylinders in this example. Then if you want to kick it up a notch, you can maybe erase some lines or add some simple colors to make it look more like a coin. do note that if you're just starting out, pick objects that are similar to their base shape, like how this coin is similar to a cylinder shape, or how the crate is similar to a cube shape. And you might be wondering, how do I get the rotations right? Well, you can open up 3D programs, say Blender, take out some objects, rotate them around, and use them as guides to get the best reference for your shape. There are many angles you can draw from, though most of the time you'll be working with a 90 or 45-degree angle, so knowing these kind of rotations can be quite handy. The cool thing is, if you put these shapes together and move one to another frame, you could end up with a fun little animation. In our first exercise, we played around with shapes to understand the basics of drawing objects. Now let's take it a step further. We'll take the sword from the previous exercise for this example. In the last exercise, we broke it down into simple shapes, a rectangle for the sword and another one for the shoulder. Let's examine it closely. It has a blade held by a hilt with a cross guard in the lower middle and a pommel. First, let's focus on the blade. It has a long shape with a pointy tip, so we use a long rectangle shape for the blade and a small triangle for the tip. We want to place the triangle right above the rectangle. The second thing is that swords can come in different styles. Some will have bigger grips while others have smaller grips. If you want to accentuate the blade, you can go for a smaller grip. At the grip's end, we can see that there is a pommel. So what we want to do is to add a circle shape there, just slightly bigger than the handle, and place it at the end of the grip. Onto the sword's guard. I want them to resemble wings, so I'll remove a pixel at each of the two bottom corners. Now, here's the part where you can get a little creative with your sword. Some sword would have designs in the middle of their guard, especially the fancy ones. You can, for example, add some paddings on the side right under the sword's guard. That way, we can have a design where the hilt look like wings. So just simple like that, you can give your sword a bit more, well, characteristic. Hey, it's been a while. I just want to say thank you so much for supporting me and being patient throughout the process. I'm planning to make more tutorials like this to help out beginners, though there might be some time constraints, but I'm trying my best to help as much as possible with everyone. If there's any suggestions or things you want me to talk about, just comment down below and I'll try to be as responsive as possible. And until the next video, stay tuned!